Yeah, no, I'm glad you only want to do an hour because I'm managing about 6 houses for someone who's gone overseas, so got a few things on my mind.
Oh, really?
Oh no, it's good. I want to keep busy, but a deflection basically. Got a few things on my mind.
Okay, so we've got Sean here with us. Hey, Sean. Sean. Who else have we got here? SHAUN. Sean, what's up? So, yeah, good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, we got some good feedback from the Chicago Blues segments that we did. So,
Cool.
Yeah, that's always pleasing. I bumped into a couple of the people that regularly watch us on a couple of other shows, and got some good comments from people. So, yeah, that's pleasing. We've got JJ's House of Jams here, and Arvon is here, so that's good. Arvon and JJ support us regularly, so that's cool. So the topic of the next couple of shows that we're going to do is a discussion, and obviously you guys in the chat too, put your comments and contribute to the show by your opinions and questions as well on that album. Can you guys see that album? Exile on Main Street. So we're going to talk about that album and have many people. Yeah, hold on. Okay. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about before I get Carl in. All the information that I use comes from a couple of books that I've mentioned before on previous shows, but I'd like to highlight them here. So the first one is this book here, Experiencing the Rolling Stones by David. Can you pronounce that?
Melvin?
Malvinini?
Okay, sounds Italian.
Yeah. Okay. So this book here is a key resource that I use. Obviously, this DVD that came out in 2010, that would have been around the 50th anniversary of the release. Something like that. My math isn't very good, but this DVD came out in 2010, I think. Another key resource that I use is obviously Keith himself. So we have to take Keith at his word. No one's going to say what Keith is saying is wrong. Well, they shouldn't. And also this resource here, which is the Rolling Stones, All the Songs, which is a good resource too. So that book, and the last one that I use for my referencing is this book here by David, Greenfield, yeah, which is All Seasons in Hell with A Season in Hell with the Rolling Stones. That's pretty good stuff. So that's most of the material that I use, and I suppose I should also mention one other resource, and I only have this on a digital, but I can recommend it, and it's called, I don't know if that's going to focus. Let's have a look. Is it going to focus? Focus. Exile on Main Street by Bill Janovitz. So that's a key reference as well. So I'll be borrowing heavily from a lot of these guys. if that's okay. Carl, give us an introduction.
Oh, great. No, I'm glad you're talking about Exile on Main Street. It's a pivotal moment, not only in the Stones' career, but I mean the career of a lot of '90s bands. I mean Black Crowes, for a certain style, but it's a pivotal moment in the history of music. I mean, it takes a great band to produce or record a double album. It's hard enough to do a single album, so it's a double album, obviously, and if you've been fortunate enough to listen to it, there's a lot of great styles on there. Obviously we know of the hit song Tumbling Dice. It's chock full of goodness. I'm not going to go through every song. I would encourage listeners and people who were curious about the Stones to actually buy the album or listen to it online to see how good it is. It brings back many good memories. Traveling in my car from California to Texas, and memories from my childhood. I mean, Andrew and I talked about this before. There's one song on that particular album that a guitar player could appreciate because they try to play it on guitar. For me, it was Sweet Virginia. There's so many great songs on there. But to the layman, Exile on Main Street was an album that was basically that came about basically out of a dire situation. They've come off the heels of Beggars Banquet, Let It Bleed, a successful tour in '69, Get Yaya's Out As We Know, Sticky Fingers, Brown Sugar, Top of the World. A couple of things happened. Alan Klein, the deal they did in '66 where Alan Klein said basically, I'll rewrite your contract, you'll be paid 33% more, blah, 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 blah. Not reading the fine print, knowing that he basically owned all the singles. Don't quote me. But it came apparent that a combination of Alan Klein and what was called the punitive tax law in England at 93%, the Stones were exiles in their own country.
Yeah, that in itself is amazing, isn't it? You know, the research that I've done, I think the Brits were charging some of their international artists, or charging them 93 cents in the dollar. But let's not mince words, mate. Klein ripped them off. He ripped them off. He didn't pay the taxes, and he ripped them off. And the Stones were shocked, were mortified. Find out that there was no way that they could pay that money back. And Keith famously said, "Jeepers, it felt like we were being pushed out of our own country."
Yeah. I mean, I guess there's an old saying: everything that glitters ain't gold. In '66, with rewriting the contract and advances, and we'll give you X amount if you give us 5 albums. But by the way, I'll control the publishing rights to these certain songs. It's quite attractive to have. I mean, Bill Wyman went from, talking about touring left, right, and centre. All of a sudden, they bought Redlands, Stargroves, they bought Bentleys, not realising that was basically upfront money. With banks, as we know, the compounding interest, the balloon payments get you in the end. And it's the same with music and bands and studio time. It still goes on to this day.
Is it any surprise that they chose France as a place for them to go and live? Are we surprised that France was the location chosen?
Good question. I don't know. I mean, the simple fact that it was basically the English Channel, so close, probably have different laws. I mean, Newcote and the South Beach and good weather and maybe fairly lax, I guess. Probably a perfect choice. All it took would, to rent a container, put it on a ship, and go across the channel and set up shop.
Yeah. There's a lot of information, available for stones nuts like us. And I suppose what we probably have to do is we have to put a lot of draw a lot of threads together. Like I've mentioned, this DVD here, this gives us a lot of information. It's where they're asking Mick and Charlie a few things, and then you have a look and see what Keith is talking about in his book. Uh, um, I'm going to play kind of devil's advocate here and say, well, look, certainly Keith Richards would have been arguing and pushing for France, because if he was already on the heroin at that stage, France certainly was the place where he was going to be able to get a good supply of it, wasn't he?
Mm. Yeah, because we did. I mean, I appreciate you lending me that DVD, and I did read books a long time ago that even though France was so close, it was a different culture. Different
big time,
different cuisine. The Englishmen loved Bill Wyman said it so candidly. He missed his English bell tips, his tea, and they all had to rent quite, had to drive a fair way to go to Nelcote, where Keith, set up shop. It wasn't like everybody was living at the same place. Everybody had their own lives, but
well, that in itself is a kind of interesting thing in itself. Mick was living in Paris, wasn't he?
I think so. Yeah, because I'm glad you picked the show, because it coincided where he'd met Bianca, and Bianca being the 21-year-old model, I don't think she would take too kindly to living in a large house full of vagrants. So he would have probably been set up in some townhouse or something upscale.
And then you had Charlie living 3 hours away too, and he didn't like the drive. So they weren't. You're correctly stated. They weren't like living geographically close together.
No.
But they were, and that in itself is like, strange. You go to France, the idea that you were going to spend some time together, and clearly they had to put a record out, didn't they? That their financial future as a band depended on this record. So they made it hard for themselves to even make the record.
Yeah. I'm going to use a word, and I just doing a few quick little bullet points. It was basically controlled madness. I mean, obviously Keith being a big creative force in the band, and a lot of the I imagine a lot of the songs and the demos would have been created before they arrived there, and a lot of the stuff obviously would have been inspired just from jam sessions there, but it was basically them against the world, them against the establishment, basically saying, we are the Rolling Stones. Doesn't matter where you put us, we'll be a band, we're a family, and we're great.
Can you just hold on for 1 second, mate? I need to interrupt. Sonia's asking for the reference of this DVD. So the DVD, Sonia, is called Stones in Exile. It's available on digital format from iTunes if you can't get the DVD. So fully recommend it. So sorry, buddy.
Yeah. I lost my train of thought.
Okay. That's me.
Yeah. Exile is basically the Stones saying, "Hey, we're a family. We're a tight unit. we're not, you know, Keith basically like we've joked about many a time when Mick got knighted, he said, "What's Mick doing? That's what we're against, the establishment." So, I mean, out of chaos, they created something majestic and eternal.
You see, this is where I'm going to kind of agree with you. Because I would say that they knew exactly what they were doing. Keith, and we've touched on this before. Keith certainly has loved this whole urban legend thing about him being on the smack, and you know, certainly he was. I'm not saying he wasn't, but I'm going to say he was in more control of the situation than probably time has contradicted.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few books surrounding that particular event. Some of it, you know, well exaggerated, Robert, you know, Sanchez, and some books that are actually quite pivotal, quite true. They go on about the boats and the bay and the girls and the hanger-oners and all that, but let's get straight to the point. Let's focus on the music and the simple fact that, you know, in a way it was controlled madness. They recorded in the basement. They had to hook up power. They had severe heat waves. They had the power would go in and out. The rhythm section would get extremely frustrated. Mick was jealous of Graham Parsons being there. Graham Parsons being a huge influence on not only the Stones but that particular sound. So out of that controlled madness, this was Keith's album. This was Keith saying, "England, I'm still your son, but I'm over here. I'm a rock and roller, and we do rock and roll. And this is the product." And
yeah, look. Yeah, I agree with you. That controlled madness, absolutely. When you look at footage of them backing in the truck because they needed a mixing board, so how were they, you know, and feeding the cables down through to the cellar and having to clean the cellar up? Yeah, certainly, and yeah, you know, and Bill Wyman saying, why did we have to effing play a song 40 times? Why couldn't we just do what we used to do and play the song 3 or 4 times? Why did we have to do it 40 times?
Yeah. Imagine, I mean, you mentioned the word heroin. I mean, obviously Keith, I wouldn't say was in bliss, but he probably felt like he was in control and had all the time in the world. And you are right, they did multiple takes, but the end result is he was striving for a certain sound, and that sound would have been very influenced by Graham Parsons, Torn and Frayed, and the country sound. It was very acousticy. We know the album. Some of the songs happened from just who. I read a little excerpt before about Happy was basically derived from whoever was awake that morning. Some of the songs were definitely leftovers and demos from other albums.
Well, that's cool, and we can certainly in the next couple of episodes, you know, talk through those songs, because I think those songs definitely deserve to be spoken about, and even if it's just in a couple of comments, because we've mentioned this a lot of times. This whole idea of a band writing and producing an album was a big thing for what was the key indicator for a band and their success. Not one song or 2 songs. They had to write, as you said in the intro, a double album's worth of great songs.
Yeah, that's a big accomplishment. Obviously every album has to have a hit song, but there's so many nuggets on there. I think I told you this before. I was in a club in Austin, Texas, and a great band was playing in this really small little bar. And they said, "Would like to play a song off the greatest country and western album of all time." And everybody was thinking Hank Williams or George Jones or Waylon Jennings. Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street. So it just goes to show you the influence that album had, not only on genres, but generations.
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly that's a key album. From you mentioned Keith earlier. He was striving for a sound. He was looking for a sound, and he'd found that sound with Open G tuning in earlier albums. Sticky Fingers is just drenched in Open G tuning, and again he continues that all the way through Exile on Main Street. That supernatural sound that he's searching for, comes out in that album. I'm going to talk about some personal aspects of that album, if that's okay, and obviously you can share your personal moments, but I was always scared of that album, and I'll tell you why. For sure, I had heard Tumbling Dice. Everybody had heard of Tumbling Dice. That was the radio song. But when you're a young guy, to have a double album, that's serious stuff. To get a double album, that meant that you had to put away a big chunk of your time, and to look at look at this album. It's look at that cover. Look at it. There's a lot going on there.
Mm.
And I remember when I looked at this album, I would have been about 14 years old, and I looked at it, and it looked scary. It looked this was a scary album. There's something going on here. That was my first immediate thought when I looked at the album cover. I thought, wow, because obviously the Stones had a reputation for being a dangerous band, didn't they? And that had seeped through into my consciousness at a young age, because they were obviously talking about the Stones back then as a dangerous band, as well as the greatest rock and roll band.
That's right.
And I probably didn't hear that album all the way through until I was about 16, maybe 17.
Yep.
And I didn't get it. I'll be honest. I remember hearing that album, and I didn't get it. I just thought, okay, there was just songs. And again, it wasn't until a couple of years, until I was about 20, 21, when I can honestly say I got it.
Yep. I agree. I was a Get Your Yayas Out guy. I was a Sticky Fingers guy. I was a Beggars Banquet. I loved all the early stuff. Exile looked like hard work. Double album, funny looking cover. And I think it's quite a mature album, to be honest.
Absolutely. I think absolutely. It's a sophisticated album. It's a mature. Yeah. I'm not going to argue with you.
Because I did a bit of research. Because there's a lot to digest on that album. All the sessions guys, Al Perkins, who's supposed to be a Dobro legend, Billy Preston, they gave him a bit of a. They said, "Listen, come on in." The guy that surprised me the most, who's a New Orleans legend, is Mac Ribermack, who's affectionately known as Dr. John. So there were some heavyweights on that album.
and it was a coup for the Stones to get the horn player, Bobby Keys. That was a
Yes,
coup.
I see. Did not know that.
Bobby Keys was on there. Bobby Keys is playing on that album.
But when you say a coup, meaning a conspiracy to get him to be locked in?
Yeah. Because he was hot. He was
He's
a
Texas.
legend in his own. Before so for the Stones to grab him and say, "Come over here," that in itself was a battle won.
And the Stones had won Bobby Keys over, not because of the partying and the girls and everything, but because everything was so relaxed. Bobby Keys could be who he was as a musician. Those sax solos are just embedded in our minds. I mean, obviously, Brown Sugar comes to mind, but overall, Bobby was like, what a band.
Oh yeah, but well, he does make a good couple of references about being a young guy and in southern France and in good times. So I'm sure they were
That helped. It might have helped.
helped a little bit. Yeah. Look, I agree with you. And I don't want to sound like a snob at all because I'm only talking about my own personal experience. I didn't get the Rolling Stones Exile on Main Street when I first heard it. It wasn't until a couple of years later where I did get it. And incidentally, me getting that album was around the time when Carl mentioned the Black Crowes. So when the Black Crowes released their first album, that was 91.
Definitely early 90s. I don't know the year.
Okay, so that would have been the third time that I immersed myself in the album because I remember reading a Guitar World article, and they were talking about the Black Crowes, and "Shake Your Money Maker" was their number one hit, and that was cool. That was a cool song.
Yep,
it was brilliant. And so I bought the album, and then you listen to that album and you go, hey, "This I've heard this stuff before." Ding dong, Rolling Stones. And then when they talk about the Rolling Stones in a couple of articles, well, then that forces you again. Okay, so I need to go back and listen to Exile on Main Street, and then the penny dropped again.
Yep. And let's talk about not only the music, but which led up to the 72 tour, which we can also mention the word Aerosmith. Just the actual look and the swagger. Swagger rhymes with Jagger, but just the whole, the scarves around the microphone, the snakeskin boots, the Gibsons, basically, here's another word I'm going to use. Loose never sounded so good. Tumbling Dice, that whole groove is based around the space in between the notes. I mean, we can say, hey, it might have had something to do with stimulants or sedatives or whatever you want to call it. But at the end of the day, it's still music. And that was a pivotal album, as you mentioned, Black Crowes, also Aerosmith and countless bands. So that album basically gave the Stones the bedrock to tour of the 72 tour, which was a huge tour.
Can I just interrupt? Arvin's making a good point here about Bobby Keys being a guy from Texas, Carl, and everyone in the chat knows that you spent some time in Texas. Was that something that Texans spoke about when you were in Texas, Bobby Keys? Was he celebrated?
Yeah. Let's believe he's from Lubbock. I think he shares the same birthday as Keith. And,
really?
Wow. Yeah. And he, it's just with the Stones in love with the South, and Bobby from the South, and I think the horn section was all from the South, Jimmy Price and those guys. It was just a great marriage. So, yeah, very well revered. And the fact that the Stones were in love with the Southern music, and they had a couple of 2 or 3 guys, maybe 4 or 5 on board who were from the South contributing, made it all seem more authentic. So it was basically a.
I think what you've just said, something there that's critical: authenticity, and I don't think we can underestimate the influence of these guys and that whole sound, tone, production of that album. Everybody talks about, and we know this, talks about Graham Parsons and his key pivotal role as far as developing Keith. But I think you've hit the nail on the head. That authenticity from those Southern guys isn't talked about anywhere near enough.
No. Because, I mean, for example, let's say I'm your friend, Andrew, and we talk about music. A true friend would bring some records over to your house, possibly a few beers, but more than likely records. And you know that these guys would be talking music. Like, have you heard of George Jones? Have you heard of Jimmy Rogers we spoke about last week? Have you heard about Little Richard or some of these these Louisiana guys, Cajun music?
Mm-hmm.
Keith would have been absorbing that like a sponge. So if the Stones didn't have all those guys around them, I'd love to know what that album would have sounded. Probably would have sounded like a garage band that we already knew the Stones were doing in the 60s. So, yeah, it's like a concoction of lots of great people all at the same time, and that never will be reproduced ever again. It was a one-off moment.
Oh yeah, and I think as we progress with these shows, I'm going to mention that a lot to that authenticity from these American musicians, Bobby Keys and Price, that you talk about. Certainly gave that album some credibility. That actually, that's worth thinking about. What would that album have turned out like had there not been the Americans on it?
It would have been stripped down, pretty raw, probably, I wouldn't say lifeless, but not as classic. I mean, when I hear Exile, of course we hear Mick and Keith, of course we hear the rhythm section, but all those, but like Brian Jones with all those beautiful things he did with Aftermath and Between the Buttons, all those little subtleties on the side, the dobros, the backing vocals, Shine a Light, the horn section, the stand-up bass. I think Bill Plummer.
What about these intangible things, mate? Like just hanging out with Bobby Keys and jamming with Bobby Keys, and maybe talking to Bobby about some of his influences, and then Bobby playing, well, this is what I was listening to, and playing maybe some, and Keith would have gone to bed, with that jam session in the back of his mind, because, we're all musicians, and he would have been like, so, and then oozing out of him the next day. You understand what I mean?
Yeah, of course. 25x5, that VHS video, which I would love to be on DVD. I'd buy it in a heartbeat. Keith at the start of that little mini documentary says, "Whatever you listen to eventually will come out in what you play." Talk about Muddy Waters, Howling Wolf, Jimmy Reed, Eddie Taylor.
So so Keith's saying it. So
Yeah.
He's quoted as
Yeah.
saying, well, okay, so these jam sessions that they were playing late at the yeah.
Oh, and I mean, Bobby Keys, I've heard him on interviews, strong personality. A lot of these guys that we've never seen on interview, I imagine they would have strong personalities because they don't want to be playing for Muppets. You know, they want their input too. So they might say, hey, listen, you know what, that tempo is a bit fast, or let's try a bridge, or maybe we should try in a different key. So, I mean, Keith's a pretty humble guy. He would have been open to suggestion. So,
Well, again, you've hit the nail on the head again, because I think that's what makes the album certainly great. These 40 takes or 20 takes that upset Bill so much. You know, he just wanted to do 4 takes like they did in the past. But again, you know, I think that indicates the role that Bill had in the band, certainly as an advisor or a director in the music. He didn't have much of a role because Keith and Mick wanted 40 takes. They were looking for a sound. So certainly, if Bobby Keith said, "Look, let's just try this and see," they would have jammed it. They would have jammed it in C because Keith would have been attuned to Bobby's seriousness and sensitivity of being a musician himself, in the search for this tone, this sound that he was looking for.
yep, absolutely. I mean, if let's say, for example, what's another example? I'm learning flamenco guitar, and I live in New Zealand, and there's no Spanish people around, and all of a sudden, someone comes from Spain, you know, and he plays flamenco guitar.
Yep.
I'm gonna be all ears.
Yeah.
I mean, I might have a successful band for 3, 4 years, 6 years, and do a few Spanish style songs.
Yeah.
But if someone who's like a what's that band? What's that gypsy band? They're called the Gypsies. You know, just trying to use an example of a band. If they came into town, they sat down. They said, you know, we'll play a few songs, and all of a sudden you see a capo on a second fret. You see a certain finger style, or maybe a certain chord progression. You'll absorb it like a sponge. The Gypsy Kings is the band. So if they're living it, they're doing it, they're from the country where it started, I'll be like, bring it on. if they're from Lubbock or Louisiana, you know, or they knew Little Richard or jammed with Guitar Slim or were neighbours with Buddy Guy, I'd be like, tell me your story. I'm from Dartford. My mum still washes my clothes. You know?
So who was managing the band? Was Prince Lowenthal managing the band then during that period?
I don't know. Some bizarre figures were around, eh? I remember reading about that name, some Swedish guy who was hooked up with that 67 drug bust. I don't know. One thing I'll point out was that was around the time of the merger with Atlantic Records, Marshall Chess. So there was definitely the son was a talent scout, almost like a sniffer. So we've seen those documentaries where he basically said, you know what, I thought I was pretty tough, this young American Jewish guy, you know, a little bit streetwise, had tough parents. Keith, I couldn't hang with Keith. But from a business perspective, it was gold. Because we know it was obviously recorded in France, double album, 72 tour coming up, mixed in Los Angeles. So essentially, I own the American copy. Even though it was all recorded in France, it was still, you know, set up for not only the American market, which was massive, but the international market.
Oh yeah, well, it's no surprise that the Stones had to do that. You know, they were clever businessmen. We've
Yeah.
made reference to that early on. They learnt a lot of lessons, and certainly they learnt lessons big time after Klein ripping them off, didn't they? So they needed to make sure that that album sounded good. Um, um, and there's no disrespect for the international audience, but the first goal for that album certainly had to be the American market, because they were the ones buying albums by the truckloads then.
Yeah, I mean, that 72 tour was huge. I mean, basically, it was the 69 tour's older brother in the sense of bigger stadiums, more shows. The PA was basically the norm then, more sophisticated lighting, bigger roadies. I mean, sorry, roading crews, managers, tour buses. There was a time they had a plane all of a sudden, did they? They had
Yeah.
their first plane.
Yep.
Everything just got bigger. I mean, the famous clip of them throwing a TV out of the hotel room. And then obviously the huge 73 tour in Europe, Australia, New Zealand. It was basically a 2-year thing. So yeah, it was, I mean, as raw as it was, the polishing effect happened in America, the little bit of overdubbing, cleaning up some of the sound. But I'm glad they had the nous to ensure the whole project was still very raw.
So,
I mean,
so how influential was Marshall Chess then? We know that Marshall certainly played a key role in selling that album. He was the one that was pushing that album. He was getting people to buy it before it was out, and so how influential was he as far as having a day-to-day influence over the band? Do you think he had any role there?
good question. I don't know because, I mean, at that particular time, Chess was going into receivership. At 73, it was bought out by a company called GRT. There was no hit songs. I think the Stones, in a way, was their lifeline.
Ah.
So because I think Chess may have brokered a deal with Atlantic Records, Jerry Wexler, Jewish guy, Umit Ertgun, the Turkish guy, a subsidiary. So Rolling Stones, that famous tongue, was a subsidiary to Atlantic Records. So imagine Marshall was not, I wouldn't say a spy, but
an insider, and the Stones liked insiders, didn't they?
Yeah. So he would have been an intermediary between the big American labels, because I'm obviously Decca was gone, not seriously gone, but Alan Klein bought the rights to that and turned it to Abco. And then obviously the Stones were pretty much without a label. So Sticky Fingers obviously kicked it off, but Exile, Marshall was saying, how secure is our investment? And it was, I guess, a double-edged sword. Party time, hang time, and business time.
Yeah. I often wonder about his role, and it's certainly something that I'm quite intrigued myself and digging in, a little bit deeper, because again we've isolated some key musicians, as far as their role in developing the album, and how that added to the chemistry and this alchemy that was going on. Certainly Marshall Chess had the contacts and had a lot of influence. I remember reading somewhere, and it's not in any of my reference materials, and so I can't. I don't know how true it is. Maybe people in the chat, but did he like used to carry around a suitcase full of money, cash?
I don't know. I don't know. I think that definitely liked the party element, and he really liked Keith, and he liked to try and keep up.
Charlie mentions that in that DVD. Yeah, you know, he all these guys think that they're Keith.
And we know that Mick Jagger was obviously jealous of Graham, and obviously Graham unfortunately had a slow demise after that. But you bring up a really good point about Marshall, because I haven't really investigated too much, but I would love to know the behind the closed doors, the business arrangements of Atlantic Records, Rolling Stone Records, the subsidiary, Marshall Chess, all that sort of stuff. Because I think that Mick and Keith, as clever as they are, they don't have the contacts. I mean, they're at the mercy of record labels. I mean, the record labels probably quite a, what's the word, a heavy foot. They might say, you know what, there's plenty of bands just like you guys.
There's one good reference to that scene, I think, that speaks volumes, certainly for a lot of bands at that time. And you've probably seen it, and there's clips on YouTube. The Beatles are at Savile Row, and the lawyers are there, and there's mountains of paperwork laid out on this table. And they're there, and they're being filmed signing, and God bless them, George Harrison turns his head and he makes this comment saying, "For the record, I have no idea what I'm signing here."
Wow, it's a shame.
And mountains of contracts, you know that. So again, and I remember looking at that thinking, wow. So the Stones would have been in a similar situation, called into an office. There's all these contracts here. Mick, sign them. Keith.
Yep. And there probably would have been a bit of what's the word? Probably a little bit of not heavy-handedness, but a little bit of pressure, like saying, you know what, you haven't had a hit record for a while, or your other contract's about to expire, or you need to do this, or you need to do that, or you've got used to live a certain lifestyle. Do you want to lose that? Or there's a lot of people at stake. Your families, you got all these, you got all these producers, engineers, roading crew. A lot of people rely on you.
Hey. Absolutely, it's a business. So
yeah,
but they would have had that pressure.
Yep. And Mick, as we know, being the accountant, studying at the London School of Business of Economics, being very astute, would have said, you know what, sign it, let's go. I mean, hey, 40% is better than 0%.
Well, touring was the big thing, though, for a lot of bands, wasn't it? Back then, that's where they made a lot of their money. They were getting a little bit back on the records, but certainly, the gate takings was where the real cash was.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a clue. I mean, it's a lot of different parts of a band. I mean, obviously you mentioned touring, the singles, the albums, the memorabilia, but the touring, like you say, look at rock promoters. And I learned this in America. If you have, for example, let's say you're going to pay a band 30 grand, and you figure out that you need 3,000 people to show up, you can pay the band 30 grand. Whether 300 people show up or 3,000, the band is automatically guaranteed 30 grand. But if it's a sellout crowd, everybody wins. It's phenomenal. The band gets paid huge amounts. The promoter gets 30 grand. Word gets out, and they can continue. So yeah, it's a business for sure.
Yeah. And I have. Who's the founder of Atlantic Records?
Jerry Wexler and Armin Ergen.
Okay, so Armin Ergen's, there's a biography out that's apparently pretty good. So that's on my to read list. But if anybody has read that and and can offer an insight onto that. And I'll also be the first to admit I've read no Mick Jagger biographies, none at all. So again, if anybody has read any Jagger biographies that wants to recommend, because there's a few out there, I'd be keen to see what people say.
Yeah.
So Simon's got this interesting statistic. In 71, a ticket would cost 50p, but a record cost £2.50. Wow.
Oh, wow. So right now, an album would cost $35 and a concert ticket's $150 at least.
Then most of the promoters took most of the money and paid the bands very little. And we all know, and God bless Simon for saying this, Peter Grant changed all that. Absolutely. There's again, I don't know if it's true, but he was a big guy, and he used to threaten some of these promoters if they weren't going to pay the band all the money that he thought that they should be getting for a gig.
Yeah, I won't mention the culture, but they're prevalent and all that since the start of time. Yeah. Record labels, publishing rights, songwriting rights. Yeah, even to this day, it's sad.
I think at the end of the day, though, it's good though that we've had giants come along and brave guys to take on these recording companies, because you look at these musicians. On one hand, they're playing because they love the music, but on the other hand, they know it's a business and they've got a family. They've got to a point where, like you said, they realise themselves that they've got other people dependent on their success. So there is that pressure that they want to deliver, because most of these people are creative people, and most of the people that I know on a low level who are creative and musical, they're generous, kind-hearted people. It's they just want to have their piece of the cake, but quite happy to give you a slice. Yep. They don't want to give you crumbs.
No. And Exile's a fantastic topic to talk about, because that was a time where stuff was changing. There was a shift. The Rolling Stones were, I wouldn't say vulnerable. They were youthful, still young, but they were, they needed help. And, there's an old saying, dancing with the devil, I mean, unfortunately, sometimes you've got to shake certain hands you don't know how to shake hands with. But it kept them going.
Yeah. Well, I think as an introduction to the next couple of shows, I think we've opened up the doors, and we've certainly had some great comments from our viewers, adding to the discussion. It's going to be an interesting series. I'm certainly looking forward to it, because we've said it before, Carl. What's your top 3 albums? My top 3 albums has a permanent 2 in it. The first one is Layla and Other Assorted Love Songs, Exile on Main Street, and the third one changes between that and 20 other records, but those 2 are always in my first top 3.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
Exile on Main Street's just, personally, it's just my favourite album ever.
Well, what it is too, and I remember talking to my uncle about this. We don't talk much anymore, but we used to talk about the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, and I love the Beatles. Don't get me wrong, and you're a Beatles guy. But the Rolling Stones have this really unique knack where their albums grow on you. They don't sound dated. Exile is one of those albums in 100 years will still sound amazing. And I think that's basically comes about because it's not restricted, it's not controlled, it's not orchestrated, regimented, mechanical. It's just a whole bunch of guys in a big house, and basically someone turned the tap on and said, "Just go."
And again, interesting.
It flows.
Interesting. You should mention that because I'll pick a bone with you there, because last night I've pre-ordered the Beatles' White Album 50th anniversary re-release that Giles, the son of George Martin, he and a team of guys have gone through and remastered that album.
Yep.
But they've also releasing the Usher rehearsal tapes. So there's about another 25 songs being released of these rehearsals and these various demos that the Beatles recorded leading up to them producing the White Album. And it's wonderful. You know, there's snippets of it on Spotify, and there's snippets of it on YouTube. So I'm excited. That's due for release in early November. But what's interesting, though, is that I read a couple of comments by a couple of other music fans saying, why can't the Rolling Stones do this? When the Rolling Stones re-released Exile on Main Street in 2010, they only added 5 or 6 songs. They've got a vault full of songs that they could have re-released with that package. The same thing with Beggars Banquet. Beggars Banquet was re-released this year, but there's no new songs. They've just put it in a new sleeve and added a couple of photos and called it a re-release, but there's no songs.
I don't know.
But again, we know through Keith's biography that they've got all these songs locked away in vaults. Interesting that they're not releasing them.
Makes you wonder, I mean, how much control do the Stones have? Or, I mean, Rock and Roll Circus took 30 years to come back into light, and the Stones were quite, the Glimmer Twins were quite, not egotistical, but quite precious about that being brought to the public because the Who upstaged them, apparently. Maybe it's an ego thing. I don't know. Maybe, who knows? Behind that looseness is a certain amount of pride.
Well, I don't know, buddy, and that's why I mention it. I'm certainly looking forward to this re-release of the Beatles album, the White Album. I'm certainly looking forward to it. I remember reading a book a couple of years ago, and when that album was re-released, when it was released, this book here, if you're a Beatles nut, by a guy called Jonathan Gould, who incidentally is a musician. So he's writing this book from a musician's perspective. He said that he'd spoken to people who were traveling from one side of America to the other for business. And everywhere that they went when that album was released, so they'd call into service stations or they'd get food, everywhere they went, that whole album was being played.
Wow.
Again, that blows me away because, do we get that, do we have that kind of effect today with music? Is there an album that dominates anything like they used to?
Not at all. Not at all.
But interesting, though, because we have this conversation again on some of these Van Halen shows. Eddie Van Halen, Carl, has got a vault full of material that he's recorded over the years. And we're saying as fans, why don't you release it? Give us some music. you know, and there's various theories that fans offer, you know. Is it his ego? Is it because he just doesn't feel the need to want to be able to satisfy his fans by releasing subpar material? Maybe the Stones are doing the same thing. Don't know. I think there's a market there for it.
Yes, bootlegs.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I have to close out. I've got dinner almost burnt, and I've got to go and check out the plumbing.
And I always rant and rave. So so I'm going to sign off then. Arvin, Sonia, Todd. Hey Todd, we're knocking off. Glad you could join us, Todd. You'll have to watch the rerun. Thank you for joining us, Todd. Simon, great. Thank you, buddy, for joining us. You're always welcome. Always appreciate Simon's comments. Who else have we missed? Soda, he's gone to bed. JJ's House of Jams. I haven't missed anybody. Thank you, guys. And Sonia, yeah, appreciate all your kind words and your support. It means a lot to Carl and I. And I'm going to say goodbye. We'll catch you guys again next week for part 2 of the Stones Exile on Main Street. And I'll leave Carl to say some final words.
Yeah. Hey, what a great show and a great segment, Exile. I mean, a pivotal album as far as rock. Let's face it. If you don't own it, I suggest buy it. You know, I mean, Andrew mentioned Keith and the open tuning, but I mean, everybody got to branch out and do different things. Strip down drum kits, horn sections, piano, harmonica, just chock full of just really amazing musicianship, background vocals. We'll talk about this later. Sweet Black Angel was a song about African American rights. How prophetic.
Yeah.
Here we are later, Black Lives Matter. I mean, such a huge album.
Awesome.
Robert Johnson, Stop Breaking Down. It just goes on and on. I'm giving everybody too much information now, but
yeah,
that's what sort of album it is. It's, you know, 20 songs. Every song is huge. I mean, but yeah, we'll continue this discussion next week.
Cheers, guys.
See ya.